Good evening and welcome to Know Your Rights. I am your host, Khadija Usher. On our show, you hear directly from attorneys who break down the law and explain the rights of citizens on common legal challenges that confront Belizeans on a daily basis. Tonight, we will be discussing your rights when engaging a lawyer. You can watch us live on Channel 7 or on Facebook at Colorblind Multimedia Productions. You can also participate in the conversation on our Facebook page. I'm sorry, we have a slight correction in that. We're actually discussing tonight amendments to the Firearms Act, the Police Act, Crime Control and Criminal Justice Act, as well as the proposal for the Protection of Witnesses Bill 2018. And joining us tonight is the Solicitor General, Mr. Nigel Hawke. Good evening and welcome, Nigel.
Good night, good night.
So we have a lot to cover, and if you allow me first, I must commend you on coming on the show and having a discussion, especially about issues of gun control and violence. And I think it's something we should not take for granted, especially if you're watching like CNN right now. And so in America, for the Congress over there, gun control is just something, it's a no discussion topic, but you're here to discuss it with us and to bring the information to the people. So with these acts, let's start from a very general point. Where are they coming from? And how is it intended that the amendments to these would help the crime situation in Belize?
Perhaps I should preface my response by saying, you know, under the Constitution, the National Assembly is mandated under Section 68 to make laws for the peace, order, and good government of Belize. So these proposed bills are really fashioned to address some mischief that you would have seen in our society relating to gang violence on the one hand, in relation to the protection of witnesses on the other hand, and then in between that, you have the issue of also regulating and controlling police discipline. So there's where you have the amendment to the Police Act. So there's enough checks and balances, so you don't want people going out there, especially police officers going out there to just say that I'm a police officer, that I can do as I please. That is not the intent, really. That is why several amendments would have been suggested in relation to the Police Act.
Okay. And a couple of weeks ago, we had an emergency press conference which was called by the Prime Minister. And in the press conference, it was very surface level at that time because it was an emergency. But he mentioned a few strategic plans of actions, and I think he was just throwing out some of the proposals they would eventually bring to the House at the media. So is it the intention that these amendments to the legislature would support some of these implementations that we are to expect in the violence mitigation?
Certainly that's the hope. We're hoping that some of these proposed amendments that you will see in the bills will certainly aid the police in their operations, and it will also assist the public in terms of bringing a certain level of public confidence, because as you know, we live in a society, we live in different times where violence is very rampant, and I think Parliament in its wisdom saw it fit to introduce these different pieces of legislation to help curb and augment the other aids that the police will be using in terms of community policing to bring some level of normalcy to the situation.
Okay. So let's start with firearms. The Firearms Amendment. What are changes, very important changes that came with this act?
I think what with the firearm though is the primary amendments you'll find in relation to the firearm here is really, it increases some of the fees or fines that you'll have in relation to firearms. Like for example, persons who are now seeking to have their firearms kept at a police station and so on, those administrative fees have been increased. The legislation also brings to bear the whole notion of not only Belizean nationals, it incorporates the whole issue of CARICOM nationals, having them on equal par with citizens of of Belize. But I
Okay.
think the range of amendments in relation to the Firearms Act really caters for persons who sell firearms, like gun dealers, in relation to their licenses and so on, persons who want to establish different businesses that would deal with firearms also.
Okay.
So it has widened the scope and ambit, but what it has also done is increase the fees, which we think at some point needed reform, because
Okay.
some of the fees that we had before, they were a bit outdated.
Okay. So, in addressing all of the legislature, was it that I want to say it was an opportune time to do the amendment to the fees, or is there some kind of link? Because what a lot of people would be thinking that when you're talking about firearms, a lot of the citizens just want that the weapons are taken away from criminals, or that we put in measures to get the weapons away from criminals. And these aren't necessarily licensed weapons. In many instances, it's not. So what is the connection there?
I think what you'll find is that in relation to the Firearms Act, it may be that there was some mischief in relation to trying to find whether there's a connection in relation to guns on the streets, how those guns get there, and the correlation between persons who are dealing with weapons, firearms and ammunition. So I think the thinking behind the framers of the bill was really to create a level of check and balance
Okay.
to see if we have situations where persons are abusing their license, in the case of gun dealers, or you have situations where persons are just careless, in the case of leaving a firearm probably in a very negligent manner and probably it's been stolen. So provisions have been put in place now where there's a mechanism, a regime where you could lodge your firearm at a police station within your district or your environs,
Okay.
but it comes at a cost.
Okay. Getting a lot more stringent in the area of the licensed firearms. We had one question I saw on Facebook, and I just want to get into it a bit because we want that the viewers know that we are listening to their feedback. And it was in terms of the licensing. People were asking, is there like a grace period after a license expires for a renewal, or is there not? I saw a lot of people commenting on it, so it's like shady ground.
I think what the new amendment has done is, I think the previous period would have been, I think either 1 year or 2 years.
Okay.
What is done now is increase the period of your license, the life of your license, to 3 years. So you have a 3-year period, but mind you, this is where when you apply for a firearm license,
Okay.
there are certain conditions and responsibility that will come with it as a licensed firearm holder. So you're required to make sure you keep a check of when your license would expire, because if your license expires, say, tomorrow, you will then become an unlicensed firearm holder.
Okay.
So it's important and incumbent upon you, if you have a firearm license, you make sure that you follow your due dates. Now, there may be instances where persons are charged in a situation where the license would have expired.
Yes.
Now, that will have to be an issue, and here you go within the jurisdiction of the Director of Public Prosecutions. They will have to determine what type of prosecutorial discretion they will address in terms of whether they will bring a charge against you or not. In instances where it can be shown that perhaps by mere oversight, inadvertence, perhaps you miss your expiration date and you run afoul of the law.
Okay. I know one area that I read which was interesting to me was that when you are applying for a license or getting your license with this firearm, you can sort of add persons' names in your households, other individuals in your households onto that firearm, or have them apply for the firearm, other persons in your household. And it kind of struck out to me because I said, oh, it's like an insurance plan. It's like a firearm family plan. Is that the...
But I don't think it works like that.
Okay.
Because the firearm, really, your firearm license is individual. So the Commissioner of Police would have to be satisfied that every person that he grants a license to, that person is competent enough to hold and carry a firearm, because the Commissioner has tremendous authority and power under the Firearms Act to revoke your license if he finds that you're no longer fit and proper person to hold that license.
Okay.
Right? The law only provides fundamentally that natural justice be given and that reasons be given if the Commissioner of Police is to revoke your license in those instances. But we always have to bear in mind that we live in a society where we have a constitutional construct. We don't have, like the US, the right to bear arms.
Yeah.
That is not the position that we have.
Okay.
In fact, your right to bear arms is severely restricted in our jurisdiction.
Okay.
But for the permission by the Commissioner of Police, you have no right to carry a firearm.
Okay.
Right? And the aim of these amendments is to really address the mischief of illegal firearms in our streets.
Okay. So we have to take a very short break. And when we get back, we will continue our discussion on the recently passed amendments. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Know Your Rights. I am Khadija Usher, and our guest tonight is Solicitor General Nigel Hawke, and we are discussing the amendments to the Police, Anti-Gang and Firearms Acts, and the passing of the Witness Protection Act. So we had a very good discussion on firearms so far. Let's get into the Policing Act, the amendment to the Policing Act. There are both sides of the arguments we're hearing. We're hearing people who are just simply fed up, just to say, make the police go in, give them more authority, make them just clean up. There are people who are saying the police are not getting any more power than what they have right now because we see abuse of the system, abuse of the authority. How does the amendments to the Police Act target the area or the strategy in terms of policing?
All right. So generally, in the current legislation, the current Police Act, for example, the Commissioner of Police was restricted to dismissing only a police constable who he thought was no longer a proper and fit police constable. Now the amendment has extended that to a non-commissioned officer. So he can dismiss now from the level of constable all the way up to inspector of police.
Okay.
So if there's a violation by a constable, a corporal, moving all the way up to inspector, the Commissioner of Police is now vested with the power under the Police Act to enforce discipline. And he could dismiss in a summary manner, right?
Okay.
That's one example.
Okay.
Another example, police officer absents himself from duty without leave, with no lawful excuse.
Yes.
There's now a provision in this new, the amendment to the Police Act, which says, if you've absent yourself 5 consecutive days
Okay.
without proper excuse to the commissioner, the commissioner also can dismiss you. And this is between the rank of constable all the way up to non-commissioned officer.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Or higher than that would have to be dealt with at the level of the Security Services Commission.
Yeah.
There are several other new amendments. Like there's a new one, it's in the Police Act now, to address issues dealing with publications, specifically on social media by police officers.
Okay.
You're absolutely restricted from doing that whatsoever now.
Okay.
So if evidence is shown that a police officer has published something, especially at the rank of a constable to a non-commissioned officer, the Commissioner of Police can institute disciplinary proceedings against you, which can ultimately lead to your dismissal or you being struck from the strength of the Belize Police Department.
Okay, so a lot of it is focusing on getting stricter within the department itself.
Controls of the police department. I should also add though, those are not the only amendments. There's an amendment also there to address the issue of counseling for police officers. Okay. If the commissioners of the view now that a particular police officer requires discipline having regard to what he may have observed in relation to that officer, he can require that police officer to undergo some level of counseling, which is kind of a welfare-oriented mechanism being introduced now into the police regime.
Yeah, and it's very left-wing, but I'm glad I'm hearing about it.
Yeah, because the police job is a very
yeah,
stressful
yes,
job, and they're working in
yeah,
a very stressful environment. And we have to understand that when we're sleeping, they're out there working. So we have to
correct.
respect the work that they're doing. So it's not all police officers who are bad. So with that, you have to strike a balance.
Okay. Are there any amendments for the police officers, the powers external to the department? Because a lot of people have this notion now that we're trying to change the legislature to allow them more powers to walk in places, to just break down more door, to, you know.
I think in most of these amendments, what you'll see, especially with the amendments to the Crime, Control, and Criminal Justice Act, is that even though people have this fear that the legislature has given police a lot of authority, what you'll see built into that those amendments is a lot of checks and balances. So you have a number of amendments now where even before they go to do certain things, they have to get, for example, if they want to have, in relation to the Criminal Justice Act, they want to restrict the movement of a gang member, they have to satisfy the court that it's proper to do so. So it has a check and balance where you have to have the scrutiny of the court. And this, when I'm talking about the court, I'm not talking about the magistrate's court here, the scrutiny of the Supreme Court. So you have judges who will scrutinize exactly if an injunction, and the introduction of a kind of a quasi-civil criminal injunction against gang members is being introduced into this bill.
Okay, I'm glad you got into that topic actually, because it is a concern for a lot of persons in the society when it comes to affiliation with gang membership or being accused of being a gang member. How do the amendments now to the Crime Control and Criminal Justice Act speak to that with the anti-gang movement?
So I know a lot of persons, members of the public would have a fear that these pieces are, these amendments will be seen as draconian. In one sense, they may be seen as draconian, and in another sense, the way I see it is that they've been put in place here, the wisdom of the legislature again, a lot of checks and balances, because in order for a police officer, the commissioner of police, to go get an injunction against a gang member, you'd have to satisfy the court, a judge of the Supreme Court, that an injunction is necessary to restrict the movement or to prohibit this particular person from moving in a particular area or probably gathering in a certain location. So there are certain things that they will have to satisfy the court of before such an order is made. And mind you, because it's an injunction, the other party will always have the obligation to go and have that injunction discharged, especially if information was given to the court that was not either full and accurate. So the court in those circumstances can vary such an order. So my indication to the members of the public is that I understand the fears, but be assured that there are provisions in there that will keep police officers in check. And I think it's also in line with what are our obligations under our human rights conventions.
Yes, I'm glad you went on that side of it, because a lot of the feedback also came in, how are these provisions infringing on constitutional rights like freedom and privacy. We also heard about deploying or zoning emergency type areas, hotspot areas, primarily around the zones where much of the crimes are occurring. Are provisions made for that in the amendment?
Well, there's already provision in the substantive act that provides declaring certain areas special areas. There's also provision if you want to go higher in our constitution of itself to make provisions for certain areas to be declared emergency areas. I think that was a proposal that was put before, but we just wanted to let you know that in the current legislation, you will find provisions that address the issue of declaring certain areas special areas, and when those areas are declared special areas, there are certain rights that temporarily that may collapse, and the police may have certain powers, but those powers they have to exercise in a reasonable manner. They can't go in and arbitrarily exercise their authority because it's always subject to review by our courts. And this is this is how our democracy works. If something is seen as arbitrary, someone can go to court and get vindication in relation to it. So it's not as though it is a full state operation and nothing can be done.
And I have to ask this, let's take a practical example.
Sure.
I grew up in my community. You know, if you grew up in a community like mine, one gang de Pandiscana and one next one de Pandiscana. More than that, you come up in the school system with gang members. These are your friends.
Right.
I mean, they're a bad man, but they're your friend. These amendments speak to affiliating with gang members, colluding with gang members. How do you, as an individual now there on the street hanging out, what should you do? Because I mean, this is a Bali you would hang out with, but in the eyes of the law now, this is a gang environment, a gang-like environment.
Right.
What would be your advice there?
Well, you see, what you need to do is you need to know how you operate, because we live in a modern world and we have to face the reality. And I'll give you an example that I observed. One Sunday I was exercising, this is in Belmopan, and I was exercising around the ring road. And we have a walkway and you have a riding path.
Okay.
So I saw this gentleman riding on the walk path, and a police officer was coming along the path, but he saw the police officer, he didn't stop.
Okay.
I mean, I'm just saying that to say, before you would think, okay, I'm riding on the wrong side, here comes a police officer, I should perhaps come off. He was seeking to pass the police officer.
Yeah.
Thankfully, the police officer stopped him, indicated him what he was doing is wrong, and he complied. But coming back to your example, you have to understand that we live in different times.
Yes.
You have to know the environment you're in. Yes. I wouldn't suggest that if you know there's a particular activity that happens in a certain location, you don't want to be there all the time, lest you be accused of associating with certain groups and so on.
Yeah.
To make the larger point, though, there must be a balance between the rights of the citizen and the rights of an accused. Why do I say that? There were two examples I noticed. Recently, there was an upheaval with the gang suppression unit going into a particular area, causing problems. That might have been so. I don't know what transpired. But equally, if we want to point fingers, it would have been equally wrong for gang members to be discharging their firearms, whether legal or otherwise. Most people would think that those are illegal firearms. But it is absolutely wrong for them to be discharging at a funeral rounds as though it's just indiscriminate. The way the news put it over that they were doing a 21 gun salute.
Yeah.
21 gun salute or not, there must be a certain level of respect for the rule of law.
Okay.
And that is why we say, if we want to inculcate a culture where there must be respect for law and order, there should also be respect for the basic values in our society. So that is the starting point. And if you're going to associate with a group of persons that will do a 21 gun salute when they don't have the license to do so, you're starting off on the wrong footing. That's all I'm saying. So you have to have laws, because sometimes a mischief is created that you need to address. We can't have society held to ransom because you have a few people who think they can do as they like. All I'm saying, Parliament in its wisdom has passed these laws to see if we can bring some level of control to the situation.
Thank you. Solicitor Jen, we just have to take one more short break. But coming up now is the second installment of the 90-second RFNG educational series, where you get to learn how insurance works for your benefit. Then we will take our final last break. Welcome back to Know Your Rights. I am Khadija Usher, and our guest tonight is Solicitor General Nigel Hawke, and we are discussing the amendments to the Police, Anti-Gang, and Firearms Acts, and the passing of the Witness Protection Act. So the final bill we need to get into is the Protection of Witnesses Bill of 2018. This is an interesting one for Belizeans because it's a bit new, right? But we're a bit exposed to it from television, as you would say. But what is entailed in our bill?
First, I should say we should all congratulate the Ministry of National Security that came up with the notion of having this bill introduced, because this bill, we want to make clear that it is not a bill, even though it says protection of witnesses, a situation where we'll go and hide you away. We've not gotten to that stage yet. This particular bill, what it does, it protects witnesses in circumstances where, as we complain a lot in our society currently, persons are intimidated, they don't want to come forward and give statements and so on. Okay. So we're saying to members of society, this bill will now give you the protection. You will be an anonymous person. You can give evidence remotely in an area where nobody knows. Okay. You will not be exposed to the accused persons. So you don't have to face them in court. You could do via video link. If you're in court, there will be provisions where an application can be made for a screen to block you so the accused person can see you. The way how the anonymous witness investigation will work is that you have to get an order from the judge, and certain built-in protections are there. So what we're saying to members of our society is that here is an amendment to a bill that seeks to protect you. For the first time, here's a bill that seeks to protect your identity from exposure. Because what we've heard before is that some of the hue and cry would be the prosecutorial success rate is low because the prosecution can't secure convictions. Persons are not willing to come forward. Police are saying, oh, we can't get to investigate because persons are unwilling. But this is the mechanism to allow you to come forward. And what it does, it helps all of us because we want to have a safer society. So if you see something, this piece of legislation is saying you can come forward, speak with the police, you can be assured when you come to give your evidence, your identity will be concealed and protected. The law provides for it now.
Okay, so what we need to get straight first, and even myself, is that this is not witness protection. This is the protection of a witness. So nobody in the call pick you up for your house and move you to PG or change your name. None of that.
Change your identity and you have to color your hair and so on. That is not it. What we're saying to you is that we are seeking to protect you. We're seeking to embolden you now to come forward. If you see something, you could come to the police. There's a mechanism now in this act that will seek to protect your identity from exposure. So you don't have no fear of a person coming to say that, oh, I'm exposed because Mr. Hawke was the witness who gave that evidence. And mind you, there are also provisions in here where it is discovered that information is leaked, whether by a police officer or otherwise, and those persons will also be charged.
Correct.
So we've built in there mechanisms to sort of give the confidence to members of society to come forward, as we used to do long ago. If you see something, you say, I saw X or Y commit this crime, and you may assure that your protection is at least somehow guaranteed.
The provision for that anonymity.
It's there now.
So, Solicitor Jen, I know this is very difficult, especially since you had 4 pieces of legislation to go through, but what do you want to emphasize to the public when it comes to these amendments that were made?
What I would say is that, look, we've gotten to a critical juncture where, yes, on the one hand, we understand that even the worst of us that you may view, they have rights, they ought to be protected. But even the victims, on the other hand, the families who have suffered at the hands of a gunman or violence, they too need protection. We're saying to both sides, these amendments, what are built into them are the relevant checks and balances to make sure that human rights are not violated. What is also built into it is to make sure that confidence comes back into our criminal justice system, where we start to see more convictions by use of the same witness protection bill. So when it comes on stream, it is our hope that persons will embrace the law and that we will start to see much more fruit in terms of what society expects. And really and truly, it's in the public's interest, it's in all of us, our interest to make sure that if a wrong has happened, that justice somehow is served in relation to that wrong.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think if we not remember anything, we must remember the whole check and balance.
Checks and balance.
Check and balance. But unfortunately, we have come to the end of our show for tonight. Thank you, Nigel, for joining us and providing important information on tonight's topic.
Thank you.
Tune in next week when we will be joined by attorney Diana Shaw, who will be discussing the rights of children. Tonight's episode of Know Your Rights repeats at 1 p.m. on Sunday on Channel 7, and it will also be available for your viewing on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you for watching and good night.